Okay, welcome back. So now we're in chapter 3, and we're going to be going over control flow and collections. In this chapter, you're going to learn about conditionals, for loops, and also we're going to talk about hash maps, array, and array list. So let's get into it. All right, so now we're in 3.1 and we're going to be talking about conditionals. So let's get into the curriculum. 3.1 conditionals. Control flow statements in Java, conditionals and loops are very straightforward. 3.1.1, let's talk about the operators. Before we review the syntax for conditionals, let's go over the comparison and logical operators that we need to use in control flow. So understand this is what we're talking about. Understand what this means, control flow. And 3.1.1.1, comparison operators. Okay, if you're coming from JavaScript, you kind of understand this, or you understand this already. But if you're new to programming and you're starting here in Java, we're going to talk about the comparison operators. So in the curriculum, we have these double equal signs. In JavaScript, we have double equals and triple equals. We don't have that in Java. So here, we understand what the operator for the double equal stands for, because another thing that I want to point out to you and make sure you understand, especially if you're new to this, is that you're going to see the equal sign. In programming languages, the equal sign represents an assignment. It doesn't represent equality. The double equals represents equality. So don't get those confused. And when you're new to programming, it's so easy to do that. So let's get back into it. Now, checks. This is important to understand. When you see this word checks, when we say checks or check something, we're talking about conditionals. So what is a conditional? We compare things. Well, that's what checks are. So these are keywords you want to have in your repertoire, because when you see them, you should be thinking conditionals. So if two items are equal, that's what the double equal stands for. Then we have this exclamation point with the equal sign, which means a not. That exclamation point is a not. And so it's not equal. And that means checks if two items are not equal. And then we have the less than sign here. It checks if items on the left is lesser than items on right. And then we have the less than equal to. Checks if items on the left is lesser than or equal to items on the right. Then we have the greater than, which checks if items on left is greater than items on right. And then we have the greater than equal than. Checks if items on left is greater than or equal to items on the right. Okay, so what is the use case for something like this when we have the greater than equal signs? Because it's still talking about comparison, or the less than, or the double equal sign. Well, whenever you're comparing something, say for instance, we are comparing numbers and we want to compare from 1 to 10. If I just say I is greater or less than 10, it's going to give me everything up to 10, but not including 10. But when I put the equal sign with it, it gives me everything up to 10, including the number 10. That's why we will add an equal sign to the greater than or the less than operator, is to include whatever the number is that we're trying to check for. So in some cases, you may want to do that. Okay. Now here in 3.1.1.2, we have what we call the logical operators. And then we have the double ampersand signs, the two upright pipes, and then we have an exclamation point, which means also a shebang. Here, the double ampersand combines two expressions. Remember what an expression is, with and returns true if both statements are true. Now remember, we talked about what an expression is. An expression is two or more values that gives you a value. So for instance, if I'm saying 2 plus 2, well, the value is 4, but 2 plus 2 is an expression. Two or more items or two or more anything that you're comparing is an expression that gives you a value. Now, if you just have one, if I just said 2, if I assign a variable to the number 2, then that 2 is the value. But if I do 2 plus 2, 2 plus 2 is an expression, and the value is 4. Understand, variables only hold values. They don't hold the expression. And when I'm comparing two expressions, they have to both, with the ampersand sign, they both have to be true. And I'll show you that in a moment, and you should already be familiar with this. But if you're new to this, I'll explain more in depth later. And so here, the two upright pipes combine two expressions with or. So that's what the two pipes mean. They mean or. Returns true if at least one of the statements is true. And I'll explain. And then we have the not or shebang, which means reverses the evaluations of the operand. Returns false if the result is true. And we'll give you some examples of this as we go forward. Now, we get down to 3.1.2, which we're talking about the if statements. Let's consider an if statement with no else clause. In Java, this pattern is simply written as if a condition is in the parentheses, the curly braces, they opening and closing curly braces is your block of code that holds your statement. Now, remember the rule here. And if you don't know this rule, let me explain. Anything inside the parentheses in the if statement is always going to be true unless we state it to be false, like adding a not in front of it or an exclamation point, which is called a not in front of it. And so whatever is in that condition, if it's true, it's going to say run whatever inside those curly braces. That code gets executed. So if you remember the rule, and that goes back to truthy and falsy, everything in a condition is true unless you make it false. And if you go back and you look at the difference between what a falsy is, we know that a zero is false, false is false. These are falsies. And so you need to understand what those are so you can understand how your conditional is going to be executed. All right. So now let's get down to 3.1.3, the if else. Adding the else clause we have right here. Here's the example. This is the syntax. We have if, and then we have a conditional with the open and closing curly brace. If this is true, if this, whatever is in this condition is true, whatever you're comparing, whatever you're checking, if this is true, it's going to run whatever's inside this block of code. But if it turns out to be false, it's going to bypass this block of code and go to your else. Now, your else is like your fail safe. You put an else in so that if just in case someone puts in something that's not valid or they didn't give you a valid number, well, that condition that you're checking for a valid number is going to be false. And so whatever that else is, it's going to send back that statement and say, this is not a number. We'll explain more in depth as we go further if you're new to this. But if you're coming from JavaScript, this should be making sense. Okay. And so now we drop down to the else if. Now the syntax for this is a little bit different. And pay attention. else if is construction in Java. And so here we have class else if is what we're calling it. And then we're giving the input here with the system out print line, enter a grade. And then we have it starts off with the if, the initial, and then it goes through and gives me else if, and else at the end. And it prints A. You can actually put these, separate them, and make them all ifs if you wanted to. But what you do is by doing it at else if, it puts it all under the same conditional. All right. And we'll explain more as we go further. Then we have 3.1.5 switch statements. Now, Java also supports a switch statement that acts something like an else if statement under certain conditions called cases. The switch statement is not used very often, and we generally recommend you avoid using it. It is not as powerful as the else if model because the switch variable can only be compared for equality with a very small class of types. Here is a quick example of a switch statement. Now, this is the syntax of it. You have a switch and we're calling it day num. We're passing in a parameter and we're giving the case. It's like a key value pair. If you, it's because this looks like an object, right? And so here we got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like keys. And these are the values for those keys. But pay close attention to that break. And we'll explain in a moment. But if I wanted to know the day of the week, and I print out day here, and each one of these cases have a variable called day, and each day is assigned a value, and we give them a day, like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. But it has a key that I can use as a reference to each one of these days. So at this 0 key, you have Sunday. So if I put in 0 for the day that I'm printing out, it's going to give me Sunday. Okay. All the way down to the default where it says day is equal int does not correspond to a day of the week. This is your fallback. This is your fail safe, right? Now, in the example above, here's the output if a user enters in the number 4. It gives us Thursday because that's what the number 4 day is. Now, and the output, if that user enters in 10, it would go all the way down to the default and pass in that string saying int does not correspond to a day of the week. So that key has to be there. If it's not, it goes down and it checks and it's not there. It's going to run this default statement just like an else statement. Now, here's how the above example looks using the else if construction. A little bit more cleaner, right? It looks a little bit more clean. It's just else if. And for the day, when I pass in a number, it gives me the conditional. So if day num is equal to 0, then print this. And so when I go through and I put in a number, it's going to give me the day. Okay. Now, 3.1.5.1 is fall through. Additionally, if break statements are omitted from the individual case on accident, notice what I say here, individual case. If I come back up here, you notice I have a break on each individual case. And what it's saying here that a behavior known as fall through is carried out. Fall through can be quite unintuitive, and is only desirable in very special circumstances. We will discuss break statements in more details in the loop section below. For now, just know that when used as a switch block, they terminate the switch statement they are in so that the flow of control in your program moves to the next statement after the switch block. Here's an example of fall through. Pay attention, there is no breaking none of these. So if I come down here and I pass in the integer 4 or the number 4, it goes through and it goes 0, 0, 1. And then when it sees 4, instead of it printing out Thursday, it just keeps going until it hits this default. That's where it will stop. Almost like a return. It execute it when it executes, it finishes executing the block of code, or it terminates the block of code. That default terminates that block of code. Now, this is because after the switch statement matches the case for 4 and assigns the value Thursday to the variable day, it proceeds to execute every statement in every case that follows. So everything after 4, it just keeps going. It won't stop until it hits that default case. So the string that ends up being printed will reflect that the last executed statement in the switch block. So this is what we will call a logic error. It's not doing what you intended it to do, but it's not giving you a syntax error. It's not giving you a runtime error. It's giving you a logic error because the syntax is correct, but it's not giving you the output that you expected. Now, along similar lines, consider this variation on the code block above. Now here, let's look at this. So we look at this variation. Here we have a break statement at the end, right here on after day 6, Saturday. If the user enters 4, the execution will fall through until it reaches the break statement and Saturday is printed instead of Thursday as the output. Now, here are some references that you want to check into, and now check your understanding. Okay, so we made it through the first part. Go back and watch this video again if it's not making sense to you. If it is, move forward. But what did you learn? You learned about conditionals in Java, understanding the else if, and really this is just going over and you are what we call the word I'm looking for is reviewing. You're going back and basically reviewing a little bit. But if you're new to this, this is totally new to you if you never learned any other programming language. But make sure you understand this, and that switch statement can be tricky if you do not put those breaks in. So now we made it to the end of this video. And remember, the more you practice, the more you improve. I'll see you in the next video.